Welcome to Deep Thought, why many high IQ people fail in life. And I'm gonna tell you what, and this ain't, if they scored high on some IQ test or something like that, okay, great. But see, here's the problem why they fail in life. Their intelligence in other areas might not be as great. Because I'm gonna tell you what, IQ tests, they really don't test life intelligence. It really doesn't test street smarts. And I've talked about this before. It really doesn't test the different emotional things that can come up. Yeah, they do well in maybe some academic endeavor or maybe reading or something, or they have a high math intelligence or something. And a lot of those scores will reflect that. They're very intelligent there. But what will come up if they out in the world? You know, I remember a quote from someone I knew who went to law school. And they were saying all the A students become professors. The B students become judges, but the C students make all the money. And I remember a friend of mine who went to law school, and he had, as soon as he came out, he was able to work for this major firm in the DC area. And he said, yeah, I didn't really learn anything in law school. Look, I'm gonna tell you what. See, here's the thing. Life hits you with different things. Going through life, you're going to be hit with different things. Yeah, it's one thing if you sit down and you take a test and you can get a high score. Hey, that's great. But what happens if you're dealing with somebody out in the real world? What happens if you have a situation that happens that wasn't on that test? You know, and it was like when I was working on one of my 1,000 jobs, I was working for the government, right? And I never forget what an administrative assistant said. And she said this. She said, yeah, they have those like law degrees and all of that. She was talking about the attorneys. But she said, I have a PhD in common sense. And she really did. She really did. She really could solve different problems. And that's the thing. Now, this not saying it's a bad thing to have that intelligence. If you have it, great. If you can pass tests, great. But you still have to deal in the world. In fact, I remember, I think it was Al Michaels, legendary basketball coach. I think it was Al Michaels. I think that was his name. But he had said, the best way to get an education is go to school for 4 years, get a college degree, but then spend 6 months working as a bartender, then another 6 months working as a cab driver. And I understood what he was saying. You still gotta get that life experience. And see, many high IQ people, unfortunately, yeah, they do well. They do well in school, but then when they get out there, they can't handle it. In fact, I knew a young lady, may she rest in peace. You know, just as an aside, I'm saying that a little too much. I'm saying that a little too much. Anyway, I remember when she was in college, I remember one time, and I'm trying to flirt with her and stuff. She got this nice red dress on, and she was up there showing me her report card. She had all these A's. And I was like, she looking good. I ain't care. I was like, oh yeah, good. Trying to rub her back and all of that stuff. But her big thing was she was very good in school. But then I remember I saw her after she graduated, and she was working with a major accounting firm. And I saw her and I said, hey, how you doing? She was like, not good. She was not feeling, she didn't look good. She was coming from work. Now, I found out later she eventually left all of that and got into, I'll say, some more creative stuff. And I praise her for that. But the thing was, it wasn't the thing. Now, look, let me be clear. It's not saying don't learn that stuff, but like that basketball coach has said, learn life all the way around. Like I know someone who they really had trouble doing some stuff in life. Very highly intelligent, highly intelligent, highly intelligent. But then some basic stuff, you'd be like, damn, what's on your mind? What's on your mind? Just going through some stuff. And I'm gonna tell you what, too often with some people, you do have some people, they think that's all they need. It's like, okay, good, okay, you scored high on the test. But what happens on the job? Like, okay, let's say even if when you get on a job, what happens with office politics? Because I remember talking with somebody on one of my 1,000 jobs. I was like, me and him used to always joke. We was like, politics, politics. In fact, when I was working on one of my jobs, it was a retail job. And I had a college professor working under me one time. And then I had a literal rocket scientist. And I remember the rocket scientist, he was trying to be all smart, do something. And he took 20 minutes to do it. And I was like, dude, that should have took you a minute. He was like, well, I was thinking this and that. Dude, it should have took you a minute. That's all I was asking. I had all this other stuff to do. And plus he's a rocket scientist, but he was still working on this retail job. And then this college professor who was always trying to be all smart, do all this stuff, really got on everybody's nerves. Last time I saw her, she was working at a dollar store. And I'm like, hold up, you got all that? You got all this intelligence, know all this, but you can't handle basic stuff? I'm gonna tell you what, going through life, formal education is good. I'm very formally educated, but then I had to go through a lot of stuff. I had to go through some situations. And basically, yeah, I got the degrees, but then, well, I hadn't been a bartender or a cab driver, but had to learn that stuff out in the streets. I'm gonna tell you what, when you learning in life, education is good. Education is good. I'm not gonna get down on it. But then you still have to deal with life. You still have to deal with people. Like any of these jobs, one of the things I learned from those 1,000 jobs was dealing with people. You still gotta deal with those situations. And you still have to learn that. That's why you have some people, they really do have common sense. They really do have a common sense or a PhD in common sense, rather. That's how I should say it. In fact, I'm gonna tell you what, 3 of the most richest people I've known only had 8th grade educations. But they made their money because they had that street smarts. And that's very important. That's very important. And I would say if you're one of those people out there who you scored high on an IQ test and you got that score, okay, fine, that's great. But maybe work a regular job. Maybe work a regular job. Don't tell them everything about you. Work that retail job. Because I'm gonna tell you what, and you can learn a lot. That's why I learned a lot. I worked on different jobs, different places. Yes, I worked for the government, but also worked retail. And I worked around different people. And that's why I was really seeing some things. But see, you have some people, they might have a high IQ and think, oh yeah, that's it. Very rare. Unless you're gonna be a college professor, it's very rare that they do well. In fact, I remember it was decades ago, and they were doing something about this guy, like one of those news segments about this guy who had a real high IQ. He was working as a janitor. I was like, come on now. Now, eventually, he was able to get something off of that, but I don't know how long he lasted off of that. Something more in line with his intellect. You just don't know. You just don't know. When you're learning out here, yes, it's good to get a formal education, but you also have to get a life education. Always remember that, all right? Anyway, that's all I have for now. I'll get back with y'all. Peace and blessings.